My name is Ella, and as you said, it's my first time speaking, so keep the heckling to a minimum if you can. Lee, actually, said he might heckle, so keep it down. My name is Ella, as I said, and I'm a private cloud network specialist with Cocho. And I first started out working on a school help desk as an IT technician. And I'm sure, as most of us, when we first start, there's a lot to do, too much time to do it in. So when I turned to a colleague and asked, how does Wi-Fi work? He said, it just does. And for a while, that had to do. That is until I was invited to my first Wi-Fi design day. And I believe it was at the start of one of David Coleman's incredible lectures, a colleague, a friend, turned to me and said, you're going to want to clock in for this. This guy is a legend. And I did, and I don't think that I ever clocked out. And so here we are, 3 years later, and I'm sharing a stage with some of incredible speakers here today. And when I was first approached to speak, multiple times, as Matt said, I was told, speak on what you know, stick to what you know, which is great advice, and I wish I'd stuck to it a little bit, but here we are. So here we are, and I am speaking on making waves, which for this, I need to cast your minds all the way back, I've missed a slide actually, all the way back to GCSE physics class, or for O-levels, some of the more seasoned engineers in the room. I am, of course, talking about the electromagnetic spectrum, and thank you, Matt and Ekahau, for letting me use your lovely slide. With Wi-Fi, as we know, sitting at 2.4 to 6 gigahertz on average. There are, of course, exceptions, such as Halo, that sits at a sub-1 gigahertz level. Not quite enough to be frying our brains, as the old propaganda used to go, so feel free to keep tucking your APs under your pillows at night. However, it's unavoidable to admit that there are waves of radiation being passed through the air. So let's take a look at how. If we reduce a network down into a single line of connection, so we start from the ISP all the way to a client device. The ISP will broadcast a message. For this, we've chosen Hello World, so apologies to any triggered software engineers out there. This message will be broadcast down a glass tube, or fiber optic cabling as we know it, as light pulses. This light will then terminate often in a device like an SFP, which will convert light into voltage by a process known as optical to electrical conversion, which is a fascinating process, and I wish I had the time to talk about it, but luckily for your attention spans, I do not. This will then pass via Ethernet into our AP, where it will be modulated by processes such as BPSK or QPSK, which are some great talks actually from other previous Wi-Fi design days that you should definitely look into. I believe Troy actually did some incredible ones. This will then pass into our AP, as I've just said, apologies, where it is modulated. Our newly modulated voltage will contain new information on phase, amplitude, frequency, which will be passed into our transmission line. The transmission line is the cable that connects to our antenna, which in most APs is often a coaxial or mini-coaxial cable, which will consist of 2 conductors. So we have our copper core, and often, not always just a copper, but our copper sheath. When the voltage is applied to the start of the transmission line, the conductors will enforce an electric field, which I believe I've got a picture of. Yes, so we have our electric field, which is visualized by electric field lines. These will cause a disturbance in the electrons surrounding our conductors, causing a current. And due to the negative nature of currents, because electrons are inherently negatively charged, this will cause a disturbance in the magnetic shield also. So we have our electric field lines, which will propagate orthogonally to our magnetic field lines. And then orthogonally to that, our electromagnetic wave will propagate down through the transmission line. This will be as TEM waves, which are transverse electromagnetic waves that can only be contained within a cable. And these waves will be passed into our antenna. I thought this was quite a cool image of an antenna, because it does show how much is air and how much is actually our conductive metal rod. So our TEM waves will pass into this, which is a charge, usually charged as the voltage is being applied, but however, as the voltage reaches its peak at the start of this transmission line, it must also then decrease, causing the neutralization period, which is here, which is where the net charge of our antenna becomes 0. As it does, our wave can no longer maintain its connection to the antenna, and it is released as free lines. These ends of our free lines are attracted to each other and form closed loops, as you can see here, which propagate away from the antenna in a sinusoidal or sine wave that we can see. We can use devices such as the Eckhouse Sidekick 2, some shameless propaganda for you there, to measure attenuation, so we can stand either side of a wall and measure our loss. We can also use processes to visualize, such as antenna gain, where you can literally have a 3D visualization of how our antenna propagates these waves. The final stage is then completed by our receiving antenna, where they will guide our closed loops back into a 10 wave down the transmission line, where it's demodulated into its original source bits, giving us the message, "Hello, world." How can this be applied in the real world? I found a really cool example, which was information teleporting. Now for this, we have to do away with the idea of the beam me up Scotty teleportation, sort of, the matter disappearing, reappearing somewhere else. And we have to handle the literal definition, which is the instantaneous transfer of data across two locations without traversing the distance between. I believe it was Northwestern University first successfully carried this out, and then it was corroborated by Oxford, but don't quote me on that one. They took a fiber optic cable, which usually would consist of billions of photons, photons being the smallest measurement of light. They instead took 2 photons, put one at each end of the cable. When data was sent down, very simplified, these particles became entangled as qubits, or quantum bits. Qubits able to exist in multiple states at multiple times, so they can be 1 and 0 simultaneously. Once entangled, they are able to exist at the same probability of times, therefore effectively mimicking, very simplified again, but mimicking each other. Therefore, the instantaneous transfer of data. And imagine if this could be applied to Wi-Fi. Imagine if we could entangle photons on either end of an antenna. Incredible, although theoretical, of course, currently. But maybe something we might see in our lifetime, you never know. So in conclusion, A, thank you for not falling asleep. B, the laws of physics are unchanging and unifying. We can use them for on-the-ground troubleshooting, such as via attenuation, or looking at directional antennas, or AP placement. And we can also use them for these incredible leaps in network development that otherwise, without knowing the barest beginning blocks, we wouldn't otherwise be able to. So thank you very much.